Mackenzie Johnston with Tri-State Livestock News, bringing you discussions concerning fair cattle markets. Today we have the opportunity to chat with Omaha-based attorney Dave Domina. He has been involved with a number of high-profile legal cases, including the impeachment of Nebraska Attorney General Paul Douglas in 1986. Mr. Domina is also well known for taking on a case in 2004 where he represented 6 independent cattle producers who took on Nebraska-based meatpacker IBP in a class action lawsuit. What are your thoughts on the current Department of Justice investigation into meatpacker pricing and the need for antitrust laws to be enforced within the cattle industry?
So antitrust enforcement is long overdue in the food processing business altogether, not just beef and not just meat, but in food processing in general. So number one, that's what I think. It's about time somebody got to it and started to bring some cases like those that have been initiated in some of the smaller meat commodities. So that's good. Right. That's the first thing. The second thing is that the beef industry is, I think, probably the most concentrated of all of them. It has not been able to withstand a critical merger and acquisition test for consolidation in its present configuration for a while. And that test sort of seemed to fall out of favor. I'm hopeful the Department of Justice will resurrect it. It's called the Hirschman-Herfindahl Index, if you haven't heard about it. So that's the second thing. The third thing is, I certainly am not going to speculate about whether there will be a presentation or an indictment by a grand jury, but there have been some in some other areas. And the most important thing to say is that there is no solution to this short of breaking up the packing companies and having more smaller companies.
Do you feel that that is the only way to truly get competition back within our cattle markets?
Yes. Categorically and unconditionally, yes. It's also the only safe way to process enough meat as a food product for 320 million people. You can't have 80 or 85% of it done in 8 plants and see 2, 3, or 4 of them go offline because of a disease or an environmental issue or a terrorist issue or a war or a natural disaster without putting the entire population at risk. So antitrust is designed primarily to protect the market, but a functioning market protects the consuming public. And we've now seen firsthand what happens to supply when the markets don't work because they're too concentrated.
Why do you think antitrust laws have not been enforced in the past?
Because they're really complicated and because producers have not organized themselves to enforce them. The law, almost all of the law, homicide is an exception. I'm not sure theft is. Almost all of the law has a very significant reliance on consumer level or victim level enforcement. And if consumers or victims wring their hands and don't take the issue to courts, don't make enough noise about it with their prosecutor, don't show enough that they care, the law falls into neglect. And the cattle business is guilty of having wrung its hands for too long.
How do you feel that import levels of beef and cattle from foreign countries, how do you feel those affect our cattle markets and our supply chain here in America?
Well, they affect, that's 2 different questions. They affect the supply chain by making it more difficult for the American consumer to buy an American product, which there would be a preference to do. Everybody who has their brains wits about them knows that country of origin labeling helps sell products. Why else would people name their companies after their states or their cities or their rivers or whatever it may be? There's an identification with a product that doesn't even make sense, the opposite argument. So in terms of consumer acceptance, of course, they provide additional competition, and in the ground meat products, of course, they destroy the identification because they're mixed together once they get here. Now, in terms of what they do to competition at the marketplace, I don't think they make very much difference because we've allowed the same four companies with their international contacts and communications to have control of both those markets and our markets. So there's no solution in just stopping imports as long as what you're doing is to allow the same transnational companies to have control of our market. They don't have to import in order to regulate an international market. They have to control the market. The only solution is to break them up. The people who are focused on imports are not thinking about the economics deeply enough.
You mentioned country of origin labeling. Do you feel bringing COOL back into the cattle industry would be beneficial? The WTO repealed country of origin labeling and most likely still stands in the way of it being reinstated. How do you see all of that playing out?
I think the WTO got in the way because, for the same reasons we've just discussed. What happened was that the packers didn't want it. The packers controlled the feeders, the feed yards, and the ranchers and the producers below that level weren't well enough organized. Even at best efforts by a couple of smaller organizations underfunded by comparison and unable to keep up and not enough support. And, if the cattlemen want a good market, they have to earn that market. They can't expect it just to be there. And earning it means protecting it. And protecting it means fighting for it. And fighting for it means spending money to keep it vibrant, not just wringing your hands hoping somebody will do it for you.
Right. When you speak of spending money to keep it vibrant, do you mean spending money on cattle organizations for them to lobby for our interests?
No, lobbying has nothing to do with this. Lobbying has the cattle industry has had the strongest antitrust law of all. The Packers and Stockyards Act of 1921 is the most vigorous of all of America's antitrust laws. They allow it to fall into disuse. The problem with organizations is that unless those organizations are willing to help take issues to court, that's where enforcement happens. You don't get enforcement. There is no enforcement when a lobbyist goes hobnobbing on Capitol Hill.
So do you feel that we have cattle organizations within our industry that have cattle producers' have their best interest in mind? Do you feel like we have true organizations that are fighting for our cattle producers?
No, I don't.
What's it going to take for us
They're all focused on lobbying. They're all focused on the stuff that builds staffs. They're guilty of the same thing that the Packers are, but they can never compete with the lobbying because they don't have enough money. Could the organizations that are well-intended be effective? Yes, but they have to learn to spend their budgets and their efforts more intelligently. They have to use the tools that they have and get involved in enforcement.
Right.
It's just like a muscle. A law is like a muscle. You don't use it, it withers away. Or the way I explain it when I talk to cattle groups, and I've given this speech is, a law is like a dam in a river. If you don't maintain that dam, you don't reinforce it, you don't build it up, you don't keep it strong by exercising it, by using it, the current will find a way around it. And what we're talking about is money, and money flows like water in a current. That's why it's called currency.
There's been a proposal brought forward to increase negotiated cash trade, to have a government mandate to increase that percentage. What is your thoughts on that?
It misses the point. As long as the same transnationals control the international market at the same level of approximate concentration they do here, what difference does it make?
If we do not get the meat packers broke up and get some significant change within our cattle industry, do you think that the cattle industry is in danger of becoming vertically integrated?
Well, of course it is. Why would cows be different from everything else? It's also in danger of losing its market share. because the public will only take interruptions in that market because of concentration for so long, and it will only continue to consume the product as long as there isn't a safer one around. And I'm pretty certain that technologically, somebody really smart is going to figure out how to produce an equally or more flavorful steak without an embryo.
Do you feel that fake meat products are a real concern to our industry?
100%.
How do we fight that?
By being smarter than they are, and by stop worrying so much about genetics and building better cows and thinking about building better beef, having it in concentrated hands, marketing it in a way that allows you to have product identification that runs back to the origin and makes the consumer proud of the consumer's choice, instead of just picking something up that looks like it'll be okay. Because once it becomes pick something up to be okay, and you're not as safe, you're out. I'm astounded at how weak the thinking is in the production level of meat agriculture at these issues.
Producers pay in millions of dollars every year to the beef checkoff. Do you feel that that is helping us in the long run to help us promote our product?
Well, of course not. The beef checkoff, what does it do? It finances the sale of steaks. Whose products are steaks? Cattlemen or packers?
The packer.
What other industry imposes a tax on some other industry in order to pay for its advertising? The checkoff dollars ought to be used for the kind of product research principally, market research secondarily, and antitrust studies and investigations overall to protect the market that would really help producers instead of beef, it's what's for dinner, so that Tyson doesn't have to spend that money to sell its product.
So if beef checkoff dollars aren't helping independent cattle producers, what do you suggest producers do to overcome this unfair situation in which they are paying millions of dollars into this government-mandated program?
They take it over. They take it over state by state. They have to win the elections to those checkoff boards. They've got to get involved. They've got to get off the ranch. And the other thing they have to do is they have to think when they vote.
So with that being said, what are your thoughts on these direct government payments that cattle producers will soon be receiving in the coming weeks?
Well, what I think is that those cattlemen, every one of them knows that if President Obama had done that, they'd be howling to the moon. And this guy took away almost all of their market, put the nation at risk in its public health, and showed people they can live without meat, permanently changed the market, demonstrably reduced the amount of annual per capita consumption. That's a data point that won't be available for another year or two before it can be tested, but I guarantee you it will be down. And some of them are going to vote to reelect this knothead. I don't feel sorry for them. I'll say one more thing if you want to publish it.
Yeah.
I was asked by somebody to assist them in working with the Department of Justice to try to get something done. And I said, well, I've got a couple of questions for you before I answer yours. I spent a pretty good chunk of my life and a lot of my own money trying to protect this market myself, and got help from a few, but very few, cattlemen. And what I said was, who'd you vote for president? I said, I don't like Hillary either, but who did you vote for president? And then when I heard the answer I expected, I said, and whose Department of Justice do you think you're working with to get an honest shake? And why do you think it's going to be honest? How much did you guys put up for the inaugural party? And then I said, I don't think I can help you. You're not helping yourselves. It's all about character. And at the core of all your questions, and what I've come back to with every one of them, when I said, no, don't get distracted by trade, don't get distracted by this or that, it all comes down to this. It doesn't make any difference how much land you have title to, or how many cattle you have title to, or trucks. If the title system disappears. And the title system depends on the stability of the United States of America. The only reason North America developed differently than Africa is that Africa still, in most places, doesn't have a title system and doesn't operate under the rule of law. North America was lucky. We fought a revolution at the same time the king had half of his army in India, and we got to be free and did it right. If the cattlemen want a different result, they've got to act differently.
Do you have any closing statements you want to make about these cattle markets, about packer concentration, about the DOJ investigation?
You know, I'm a Nebraska farm kid. Grew up throwing hay to cattle. If I were 30 instead of the age I am, or if I had children who were young enough that they were still making career decisions, I would tell them, if you want to produce meat for a living, you have to live a completely different life than your ancestors producing meat had lived. You have to be very actively involved in the political discourse of your country. You have to always think about what is intelligent government, and you cannot be distracted by silly little social issues. You cannot allow prejudice to invade your heart. You have to be a clear thinker, and you have to always make your decision by measuring what it will look and feel like in 20 years. So the market we're talking about, whining about today because it hurts so much, that's the market of 2005. Well, where have these guys been for 15 years? That's the market of 2035 if what they want is a temporary fix, except that in 2035, per capita consumption will be significantly lower and the demand for their product will be lower. And they will have synthetic beef competition. They ought to go capture that. They ought to be vigorously supporting the research for how to produce laboratory meat, genuine meat, and own it. And then just finally, if I had one more sentence, I would say, don't you forget what I said about the title system.